59 people killed and at least 527 people injured. These are the latest casualties in America's worst shooting incident that happened on October 1st at the Route 91 Harvest Festival in Las Vegas, Nevada. Police identified 64-year-old Stephen Paddock as the gunman who shot himself as the police broke into his hotel room from where he fired. The FBI said there is no evidence so far that Mr. Paddock had ties to any international terrorist organization, and relatives said he had not displayed strong political or ideological beliefs in their interactions with him. At least 23 firearms were found in his hotel suite, according to the Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department. When asked about a potential motive, Sheriff Joseph Lombardo, the head of the Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department, said he could not get into the mind of a psychopath at this moment. So what's behind the deadliest massive shooting in American modern history, and why is the gun control process so lacking in the U.S. that innocent people continue to pay the ultimate price? Welcome to The Point with me, Lu Xin, coming to you live from Beijing. And I'm joined by Douglas Smith, former Assistant Secretary at the U.S. Department of Homeland Security, and by Professor Ian Rafowitz, Professor of History at Empire State College of the State University of New York. Gentlemen, welcome to the show. Now, although the FBI has said there was no evidence so far that the shooter had ties with any international terrorist organization, Mr. Smith, there are a lot of people, however, who are calling this domestic terrorism. Do you agree or not?
I guess if you sort of interpret terrorism as something that brings terror into a group, sure. I mean, I think what we saw yesterday was just a horrific, absolutely depressing situation. I mean, I can't even begin to think just the misery and the pain that those families are feeling right now. I think the word terrorism is one that we sort of push out there very, very broadly. Our president likes to apply it in certain ways. I think any time that 50-plus innocent civilians and 500-plus people are injured and murdered, I think that could fall under terrorism. Now, what drove this guy? Was he a psychopath? Was he carrying out an agenda? I don't really think that matters. I mean, I think it will address, yet again, the larger issue in the United States of our inability to come to terms with people owning weapons of mass destruction, and I would call these weapons of mass destruction. Anytime you can put a fully automatic weapon and mow people down and kill them in their spot, I think brings up a larger and challenging situation. The question will be once again talking about this a day, a week, a month from now, or will our elected leaders finally have the courage to stand up and do something about it? I think we can mourn and take action at the same time. The question will be, will our elected leaders do that this time?
Well, we're just also joined by Joe Rubin, president of the Washington Strategy Group from Washington. So, Mr. Rubin, you have been listening to what Douglas Smith was talking about. Do you think that this massive shooting fall into the category of terrorism, although we're not hearing the word being used, but many people are saying, hey, wake up and face the reality. This is terrorism, and this is domestic terrorism, carried out by white people.
Well, it's great to be with you, and this is clearly an act of terror, and it was a horrifying event, and it is something that defies description. I think that's where the struggle is right now, and I think the question about terrorism and the debate that we're having here in the United States is because there's been a loose use of the word terrorism oftentimes, and in particular use targeted at Muslims, targeted at minorities, where whenever there's an act perpetrated where it happens to be that the individual is a Muslim, for instance, that it suddenly becomes a terrorist act. But when it's perpetrated by someone who's white and Christian, it's not. And I fear that we've lost the sense of the meaning of the word terrorism, and it's becoming a talking point, when the real issue here, as the professor was saying, is guns. The real issue is the inability of the government at the federal level to provide any meaningful guidance, regulation, or background checks onto the distribution of guns in our society, and we're just armed to the teeth here in the United States, and it really is a dangerous situation, as we see both in Las Vegas and on a daily basis. Gun homicides, suicides in particular, are at a very high and alarming rate, and we're not doing enough to prevent that.
Mm-hmm. Professor Rayford, the reason why I'm asking this, I've been asking this question, and I don't think it's missing the point, is exactly because how you define it also defines how you deal with it. And President Trump has been, you know, sounding the alarm of foreign immigrants potentially coming to the United States and bringing terrorists together with them, and ignoring the kind of the problem that's created by people within the United States, and that is a problem in my eyes. What is your take on this question?
Well, I think the issue of how you define terrorism really is the key. First of all, terrorism, at least to my mind, is killing with a political motive behind it. We don't know yet whether this person is killing with a political motive behind it. We don't have any evidence of that yet. We have stretched the boundaries of terrorism far beyond the definition of terrorism, far beyond. But one doesn't have to be a terrorist to be a threat. One doesn't have to be a terrorist to kill people, obviously. And you're talking about how to deal with the threat to the average American citizen, whether the person is a terrorist or not. Dealing with the gun issue has to be a part of the solution. It's important. The terrorism issue is important, as my other colleagues have mentioned, because there's a matter of whether we downplay terrorism, real terrorism with a political motive in the United States. Do we downplay it when it's committed by somebody who's white? We had Dylan Roof a few years back, who massacred African Americans in a church in a specifically racist political act, which was clearly an act of terrorism. So does the media, do political figures, perhaps more on the right, downplay terrorism when it's committed by somebody who's white and Christian and male? That's something that I think we've seen in the media and with politics, with politicians. I hope we can get a sense that any act of terror, any act of violence needs to be addressed the same way, no matter the race or the religion of the perpetrator.
Yeah, well, there's also the other side of it that's often ignored, which is the widespread of powerful firearms in the United States, and the easy availability of people can, get hold of these firearms, and these people, as it, have been proved, can be mentally sick or radicalized. So is the lack of gun control really a form of terrorism in itself? Douglas Smith, maybe you can give a try to the answer.
Yeah, look, I think our elected leaders need to stand up and have the courage to face this once and for all. I was at the Department of Homeland Security when Sandy Hook happened. I vividly remember sitting there. I was in a meeting, and my aide whispered into my ear what had just happened, and my heart sank. I have a little girl, and all I could think about were those parents, and all I could think about was, yet again it strikes, will we have the courage to stand up and do something? And look, I think President Obama and Vice President Biden, they pushed it a bit. Did they push it enough? No, they didn't. And yet it happens again and again. I mean, just last night in Kansas, which wasn't covered, of course, there was a shooting, 5 people shot, 3 people died. I mean, every single day, every single hour in this country, people are dying from gun violence. We put money to cancer research. We put money towards Alzheimer's research. We put money to any number of diseases. Gun violence in this country is a disease. A member of the leadership of the United States Congress came within, in his own words, 1 minute of dying several months ago, and yet the Congress won't act. Is there an easy solution? No, there isn't. Anybody who stands up here and says they can flip a switch and turn it, they can't. It's not true. But is it time to at least begin the difficult discussion and figure out systems that we can put into place? Whether this individual is anything beyond a deranged, mentally unstable person, or whether he was radicalized, it doesn't really make a difference. 53 people are now dead. 500 plus people are wounded and will carry this wound for the rest of their lives. Well, so I think the challenge is to face up to it and do it. And the last thing I'll say on that is, it's both a federal and a state challenge. I spent a lot of time in Las Vegas. Las Vegas is an amazing city. A lot of my former law enforcement friends work there. They work in the casinos. Las Vegas Police Department is an amazing department, but the gun laws in Nevada are a little scary.
Yeah, we're going to talk about that in just a moment.
Numbers of rounds in your clips.
We're going to just talk about that in just a moment. Let's take a listen to a paragraph of what President Trump says in reaction to the mass shooting yesterday. Let's take a listen to this.
It was an act of pure evil. Our unity cannot be shattered by evil. Our bonds cannot be broken by violence. And though we feel such great anger at the senseless murder of our fellow citizens, it is our love that defines us today and always will, forever.
Well, gentlemen, I would like to get your reaction to what President Trump said. He called this an act of pure evil. Let's not forget, however, that since he came into office, he did the opposite of stopping this evil by signing a bill into law, rolling back Obama-era legislation that would make it harder for people with mental illness to purchase a gun. So, Mr. Rubin, what is your reaction? How do you look at President Trump's reaction in his speech?
Well, one can't argue with the words that the president said yesterday, certainly, but they lacked any call to action. And that's what Americans want. And the time for discussing and debating this is always. It's not after an incident. It's not before an incident. It's always. We have, as previous speaker said, we have too much gun violence in this country, 33,000 gun deaths a year. And if we don't have a federal government leading the way to have national policies that increase our oversight of who owns guns, that increase the review of the mental stability of who owns guns, that increases the background checks and strengthens it so that local law enforcement feels confident that they are able to control the situation, we're going to continue to have this level of violence. And that's where President Trump fell short. He did not make a call to action. I doubt he will. And in fact, I doubt that the Republican leadership in Congress will. I worked as a Senate staffer for a Democratic senator several years ago who fought very hard for closing what they call the Gun Show Loophole, which is essentially a loophole where if one wants to purchase a gun at a gun show, not at a store, they don't need to have a background check. That loophole still exists. It's a basic common sense protection for everyday Americans. And right now our government is failing to provide those kinds of protections. And yesterday's incident highlights it, but it's a discussion that we need to be having every day. And I fear that the president's statement yesterday will not inspire discussion. It will just inspire a lot of argument, and we won't get a policy moving forward that will help protect us.
Yeah, indeed, it was intriguing because right after the speech, even CNN, which normally would, bash this president, called it pitch perfect because it sent out a message of unity. But exactly as what Rubin was singling out, he did not mention at all any call for action or that, let's have debate or whatsoever. He simply did not mention it. And even today, on his way to Puerto Rico, when he answered questions from the press very briefly, when he was asked, what he's going to do with this debate on gun control, he said, we'll talk about it later. So President Rafowitz, yeah, go ahead, Rubin. You wanted to say something.
Well, let's be very clear here. If he calls for gun safety regulations, he is directly challenging his core base of voters who don't want that. And clearly the president doesn't seem to want to stand up to his core base of voters on an issue that is deeply important. 90+% of Americans in poll after poll support meaningful gun safety measures, and yet it's not getting done politically because the base voters are not allowing it to happen.
Well, do you think that after incidents like this, that people's opinion would change? For instance, There are, you know, this guy who has been a proponent of the Second Amendment by the name of Caleb Keita. And he said that he has been supporting gun rights, but after the Nevada shooting, he calls for stricter gun control right now, and he says enough is enough. Mr. Rafowitz, how do you look at the chances, however slight it is, that mass shootings like this could push, you know, the American government and the American people and the politicians to, you know, come one more step closer to doing what is absolutely necessary?
I wish I could say that an incident like this would change the politics, but we've had too many other incidents like this. Even though the more people were killed in Las Vegas than in any previous incident, we've had too many others where dozens of people have lost their lives and families are mourning. We have a mass shooting, which is defined as 4 people being shot or more in a given occasion. We average 1 a day. So even if we just said that we wouldn't talk about gun control on the day of a mass shooting, we would literally never be able to talk about gun control. The issue is one of politics. It's an issue of the power of the National Rifle Association, specifically over the Republican Party, but also in general in rural areas, in areas where guns are, you know, as people say, a way of life. But one of the problems is we do have gerrymandering, which is the fact that districts are drawn in such a way for Congress, the seats in the House of Representatives, where if you are a conservative, you really have nothing to fear other than somebody coming along and saying you're not conservative enough and defeating you in a Republican primary, because there's no way that any kind of Democrat could defeat a Republican. There are a lot of seats like that. There are also a lot of Senate seats in states that are disproportionately rural, and a state like Montana or Wyoming has the same number of senators as California. So disproportionately, rural areas have an excess amount of power in the Senate as well. So the way our lines are drawn, the way our constitutional system is drawn, favors groups like the NRA. It's not going to be that that people are going to move because of a shooting. People are going to move when they see that their seats are in danger if they don't move on gun control. And I don't want to sound too pessimistic, but honestly, I'll believe that when I see it.
Well, Mr. Rafowitz, you're talking about a problem that nobody can shake. That is the political system of the United States, how the U.S. democracy is carried out. Is this what you're saying, that something has to be done, you know, on that before gun problem can be regulated?
Well, that is one problem that affects not only guns but other issues. There is a case going before the Supreme Court. I don't want to go too far off topic, but there is a case before the Supreme Court that's being argued, I believe, today, in which the court will have an opportunity to rule that this gerrymandering on the basis of partisanship, in other words, drawing district lines to create almost a permanent majority in some areas, or to make it almost impossible for a member of a particular party to lose a seat, that this kind of gerrymandering might be ruled unconstitutional. This is such a fundamental issue that if the court does rule it unconstitutional and we get serious change there, it could open up the possibility of change on gun control and on other issues as well. It really is a core issue of process that affects the outcome of our political debates.
Okay, we're going to take a very short break, and you have been watching The Point with me, Li Xin. We'll take a short break, and we'll be back right after this. Stay with us. Welcome back. We've been talking about the mass shooting in Las Vegas with Douglas Smith, former Assistant Secretary at the U.S. Department of Homeland Security, Joe Rubin, President of the Washington Strategy Group, and Dr. Ian Rafowitz at Empire State College of the State University of New York. Mr. Smith, let me ask you this question about the opinion within the American society. According to a latest BBC poll, the U.S. has approximately 300 million million guns, nearly one for every member of the population. And in the latest Gallup numbers, 55% of people said they wanted stricter gun laws, while just 10% wanted less strict laws, and 1 in 3 prefer the laws stay as it is. So what does that say about the opinion within the American public towards the future direction, you know, when it comes to gun control? How divided are they, and whether there is growing tendency of the American people wanting to have stricter gun control?
You know, I thought Joe was making a really interesting point, and you know, what I would say is that Donald Trump right now in his poll numbers has no place to go but up. Yes, he'll offend his base, but his base hovers around 32% or so. When you address the fact that 90+% of the country wants to see gun control happen, if there was ever a moment of time where a leader could step up and really do something, this would be it. You know, the president, love him or hate him, stands from an incredibly powerful bully pulpit. His ability to go on national television whenever he wants and address the American people is an incredible advantage. You know, this is his moment. I mean, this is a moment where Donald Trump, if you so choose, could turn his presidency around. He could stand up and be the leader that the country is looking for. He could stand up and say, enough is enough. We've tried it the other way. Now is the time to do something. And yet, I think he will remain silent. You know, as one of your guests was just referencing, you know, in the Congress this week, they're debating whether to allow the bill to be passed about silencers on weapons. I mean, could you imagine if yesterday on those automatic weapons there were silencers? I mean, it would have taken that much more time for law enforcement to identify where the shooter was.
Yeah.
You know, I think the challenge right now is whether our leaders will finally stand up. There are some amazing members of the United States Senate, you know, Senator Markey from Massachusetts, you know, other very powerful, well-respected members who were screaming for this. But what we need is the president to stand up. What we need is for the leader of the Senate, Mitch McConnell, for the Speaker of the House, Paul Ryan, to finally have the courage to stand up against the gun lobby and say this isn't about the Second Amendment. This is about a catastrophic health crisis affecting America. The fact that we are seeing our citizens slain every single day can no longer stand. We must stand up and do something.
Yeah.
You know, I think, unfortunately, we will wake up again tomorrow to yet another tragic incident without our leaders doing anything.
Yeah. Well, President Trump is faced with a dilemma, right? It is unsure whether he's going to talk about stricter gun control anytime soon. However, as you just have said, one of you three, I think it's Ruben, that President Obama didn't do enough either. I mean, and it's of doubt whether Hillary Clinton, if she had been elected president, whether she would be able to do much more given the difficulties that previous Democratic presidents have seen in enacting stricter gun control laws. So what's your response to that? Why even President Obama, who was against gun rights, couldn't do more? Ruben.
Well, thank you. Here in Washington, we have a saying, this could be President Trump's Nixon goes to China moment, where essentially on an issue that is near and dear to the base of the Republican Party, only a Republican president can go to make a real change. And with Nixon going to China, he was able to stand up to his most hawkish advisors and party members to open up the relationship with China, critical for American national security for the last half-century nearly now. The same thing has to be done. And there was a moment a few weeks ago, you may recall, where President Trump cut a deal on the budget and the debt ceiling with the leaders of the Democrats in the House and Senate. They called it with Chuck and Nancy, Chuck Schumer and Nancy Pelosi. And the result of that was that his poll numbers actually bounced up a few notches. So if he steps back and thinks about the opportunity to reframe how he's perceived and to get a bounce, he could very well move on this issue. And in fact, he has a history of having spoken about smarter gun measures, especially being someone from New York City, where they do have tight gun laws, and as a result, it's a safe city on a per capita basis when it comes to gun violence. And so I'm not going to hold my breath, because one can never really predict with this president, but this is a window of opportunity for him. But if he doesn't do it, it's very hard to see how it changes. President Obama could not push around a Republican Congress despite all of his efforts. So he ended up doing, and I'll close with this, he ended up doing what we call executive action, where he took unilateral moves as president to enact stronger gun control measures, but those that can be easily undone by any president, and President Trump has the ability to undo those measures, and has been undoing them as well.
Yeah. Finally, Mr. Rayford, I have about 1 minute to go. There's the saying that gun violence is the new normal of the United States. Do you accept that?
Well, I don't accept that. One of the things we know is that the United States has far more gun violence and a far higher murder rate separate from guns than any other developed country in the world. We also know that from statistics that states that have tighter gun laws, American states that have tighter gun laws, have lower rates of gun violence. We even know that states with tighter gun laws have lower rates of police officers being killed by a gun. States that have looser gun laws, where there's more widespread gun ownership, sees more police officers killed by guns. Now, if those statistics can't make us act, I don't know what will. But I'm not confident about President Trump's desire or willingness to break with his base, but I agree with my colleague that his change is necessary to have a change in the national gun laws right now.
Okay, we have to go. Thank you very much, gentlemen. Professor Ian Rayford, Professor of History at Empire State College of the State University of New York, Joe Rubin, President of the Washington Strategy Group, and Douglas Smith, former Assistant Secretary at the U.S. Department of Homeland Security. And as usual, here's my point. It's been heartbreaking to see the images of the shooting and hear survivors and eyewitnesses talking about how they survived and helped each other at times like this. People in China, and I believe in other parts of the world, are also shocked and saddened by what they see. However, there is the big question, the answer of which just eludes us all. Why, after so many deadly gun attacks, there are still mass shootings in the U.S. and the casualty still gets bigger? A place where gun violence is the new normal is not a place where one wants to live in. In Europe, it's not like this, nor is it like this in most of the rest of the world for that matter. A country that prides itself on being the policeman of the world does a pretty bad job policing itself so far. What will it take for the U.S. to understand the problem it is facing and take the audacious decisions to stop it from getting worse? Unfortunately, with a society more polarized than before, and in a political system where voter support is more important than what is good for the country in the long run, gun violence will continue to haunt America in the years to come. That's all for this edition of The Point with me, Li Sheehan. As always, follow us on Twitter or visit our Facebook page using the handle The Point with Alex. Download the application called CGTN Live to watch our show on your mobile devices, or go to YouTube and look for CGTN The Point. Thanks for watching. You've got the point.